Spotlight On is brought to you by Light, the technology platform reimagining e-commerce for live events. You can learn more about Light at light.com/partnerships. That is lyte.com/partnerships.
Hello and welcome to Spotlight On. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. This week, the spotlight shines on Carrie Kania, publishing director at photography agency Iconic Images in London. From small-town Wisconsin to the top of the publishing world in New York City, and now living the fantasy life in London, Carrie's story is one of a music and art lover made good. I enjoyed getting to know her more throughout our conversation, and I am absolutely sure you will too. Enjoy. I was thinking earlier about like the nature of the kind of projects that we work on individually in our careers, but that we worked on together. And they're kind of like, I think of it as like working on a movie where you are part of a team for a very specific period of time, and it's sort of concentrated and intense, and you meet people and you grow to be fond of them. And then the project ends, and you have to be super deliberate about maintaining those connections, and more so as we get older, I think. I don't know if you experience that.
I think that's true, but I think that once you meet like-minded individuals, no matter what area, and perhaps it's unique to the art, but you stay connected because, you know, at the end of the day, you want to go out, you want to share music, see films, or read books, or look, do you know what I mean? We want to engage with art. And I think we're in a very lucky position in the sense that we made that passion a profession. And I think you keep hold of people because of that. You keep your contacts alive because there will always be something to talk about, whether it's work related or not. We're lucky that oftentimes it's work related, but even if it's not, you want to share a new photo of somebody, or there's a film I love, or there's an art opening or an exhibition, or there's some new thing that comes across your radar. You want to share it. You want to tell people, you want to get the word out that documentary is amazing, or I just went to this exhibit. If you're in London, go see it. And that's part of the job. And that we're lucky that that's part of the job. I'm not sure if we're working in tech or if we're working in another industry, do you share that sort of cultural passion as much as we are enabled to do?
And the other thing too is, even though time goes by, oftentimes the groups rematerialize on other projects that you had no idea were going to happen, and they sort of arise out of left field, and then all of a sudden the band's getting back together.
I think that's the magic of it. And especially when you work with art in any form, and I consider music and photography and books and film as art, it's a small world. We're all connected. And 100%, you're going to work with someone 5 years ago that they're going to come up again in a different project, in a different role, or maybe you're working with somebody on the Beatles and then suddenly they're working on the Animals, or if you're working on the Stones and then suddenly a Muddy Waters project comes up, and that's our DNA. That's what connects us. It's the ultimate thread, and it's great to be a part of. It's great to be a part of that network.
So when did your engagement with art, even as a fan or a consumer, if you will, when did you first get sucked in?
I think, and I hope it's true for everyone, but, as a kid, you absorb everything around you, and maybe you don't realize it. But now looking back, you think, when did I first hear music or see visuals, or, and that is my dad playing the radio. And he always had the same radio station, and it was good old-fashioned, old-school country western music. And his favorite TV show was Hee Haw. So that's my first memory of just hanging out with my dad. I couldn't have been more than 4, 5, 6 years old, listening to Hank Williams, listening to Johnny Cash, listening, and seeing Minnie Pearl at Roy and Dale on TV and experiencing his enjoyment of that culture through my eyes. And then my mother loved big band music. So on one hand, when I was with my dad, it was always country. And then when I was with my mom, it was Sinatra and Benny Goodman and Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong. It was the classic sort of big band jazz music that was always playing in the kitchen. And then, of course, that informs that sort of, backbone to growing up. And then, as the case is with a lot of people, two things happened. I started to want to hang out with my brothers because they were 10 years older than I was, and I want to hang out with my brothers. And one brother was into Supertramp, and the other brother was into Billy Joel. So suddenly now I'm exposed to this new genre. And then that led me to start looking at, and at the time, Supertramp was a new band. And then I think must have been Christmas. I don't think it was a birthday. And I wish I knew who it was, but someone gave me a cassette tape. And it was K-Tel Records, the good old K-Tel Presents. And it was a best of British music. And I must have been 9 or 10 years old. And I wore that tape out and I played that tape front and back until there was no tape left. And I don't know how I found the station, but there was a program called Rock Over London. And that changed my life. I mean, it was a midnight show, it was on Sundays, and I would listen to that weekly radio program. And suddenly all this music, and it was the Smiths and the Cure, Depeche Mode. It was that early 80s wave that came over, which then, of course, led me to remembering Saturday Night Live and the musicians that they would have as guests, and experiencing music through Johnny Carson, the musical guests that he would have on. And then strangely, and I don't remember the dates, was the Muppet Show had Blondie. And I remember watching Blondie on the Muppet Show, and that, you know what I mean? So the culture you consume as a kid, whether you're sitting with your parents or you're watching TV, I mean, that had such a massive impact to me. And then I just started to fall into it. And one band led me to another. So, if a band mentioned David Bowie, suddenly I went back to all the David Bowie back catalog. Someone mentioned Roxy Music, I went back and listened to all Roxy Music. And at the time, you could check out records from the library.
That's right. That's right.
So I would go and I would try to find, and it wasn't a lot. I mean, it was a small town, but I'm probably the only one who would check out Diamond Dogs or the first 73, 74 releases.
You have to wonder how those records got there. The first time I heard Abbey Road, I checked it out from the library. And in retrospect, I wonder, why the hell was that at the library?
Right. Why was Roxy Music in a small, tiny library in a tiny town in Wisconsin? You
know what? Because it had to be. It absolutely had to be. I'm sorry. I cannot. I'm going to stand by that. It absolutely had to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, in music, when you start engaging in it properly, it just opens a whole can of worms, because these are the long before the days of the internet, where you had to go look for magazines. And again, marching into the library with a list of magazines, whether it be Melody Maker or NME or Smash Hits. Can you get me these magazines?
Let me stop you for 1 second. So you said small town, Wisconsin?
Wisconsin.
What was the media there? Did you have, you talked about your dad's radio station, but did you have radio? Were you able to, where was Rock Over London broadcast from?
It had to either be Chicago or the college station in Milwaukee.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And who knows? I mean, it's just turning the dials. You're always on FM. Yep. And if you try to figure out what station is even going to come through half the time. I mean, back in the day, it wasn't always clear. And there was definitely the Casey Kasem channel that played the hits of the day and whatever that music was. I don't even remember the popular music growing up because I wasn't into the popular music. I remember a couple of years on when everyone was listening to Michael Jackson, and every single person I knew had Thriller. And I was listening to the first album by the Beastie Boys, so I wasn't into that at all. I wasn't into the popular culture. I was into more, say, alternative culture, but I wanted the alternatives, and that's where I gravitated.
When you talked about the K-Tel record, the best of like whatever it was, British music, what was the music that was on the tape?
I remember it was Bow Wow Wow. I remember early Flock of Seagulls. I remember maybe it could have been Tears for Fears, but it was, a good like 10 or 12 different acts.
So like the basically the early new wave or whatever.
Early new wave. Yeah, early new wave. But then the early new wave then brought me back to punk. So when you find somebody, I often try to figure out what made them that. And then so listening to early new wave brought me back to Boland, Bowie, and Roxy. And then suddenly New York Dolls hits my radar. And then that led me to television, and that led me, do you know what I mean? Like one band would definitely lead to another.
Did you have a record store?
Milwaukee had Mainstream Records where we would line up for tickets. And if it was going to be a big sellout show, we'd be sleeping all night in front of the record, on the sidewalk, a bunch of goopy kids trying to get that ticket because you couldn't trust the phone because it wasn't touch tone. It was rotary dial. So if any zero, you're not going to get in there. So yeah, lining, sitting, sleeping out loud all night for whatever show was coming to town. We did that. It was Mainstream Records.
So Milwaukee was essentially your city, though. So you grew up in a small town, but Milwaukee was sort of the magnet.
Yeah, Milwaukee was about I would say 45-minute drive.
If I remember correctly, you had all the venues. You had an arena, you had theaters, you had clubs. So music came through.
We were lucky in Milwaukee because if an act traveled and they were going to hit Chicago, it was likely they would hit Milwaukee because it's not that far. It was an easy trip. I didn't really go to arena shows because the bands I was into wasn't big enough for arenas. So it was Oriental Theater was definitely one of the big venues there. I saw the Smiths there. I saw The Cure, Psychedelic Furs, In Excess, Howard Jones, Paul Young, anyone who would come to town.
Who do you remember as being particularly good live back then? I mean, I remember In Excess was phenomenal live, but who stands out for you?
Strangely, Brian Ferry stands out. It must have been a solo tour. Must have been when he started releasing solo albums in the 80s. David Bowie stood out to me because I remember going to see David Bowie and being surprised that it wasn't a sold out show. There were definitely a lot of empty seats. I remember that. I remember that my friend that I went with who drove was really sick, was really not feeling well. And so she kind of had to sit there where I was up, as you do, in the crowd. And I remember Bowie looked, because we were on the side of the stage, probably side left. And I remember Bowie turned to us and waved. And I'll never forget that. I was just like, I know he saw me. I know for a fact. We made eye contact at that point.
That's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
How communal or social was music for you? Like, were you a weird kid, or like, were there other kids that were into the same stuff?
There was a small group of us. I mean, there was a little band of the alternative kids in school who perhaps dressed a little bit differently than everyone else. And we were all in the art room or the band room, we were definitely the art kids in class. And that was our crowd. And I would say march to the beat of a different drummer, but I remember being teased and picked on for, having orange hair or blue hair or green hair or mohawk or tons of badges and silver shoes. And you know what I mean? That sort of, you try to craft your look, going to thrift stores and the Army Navy store for a trench coat and Doc Martens. And you try to cobble together your look as best as your finances can do. But that's when, thrift stores were amazing for us because you could buy junk and jewelry and hats and clothing and really style them in your own way. But we had a little gang and it was no more than 6 or 8 of us. I mean, not that many. And there were a few clubs. I mean, I remember Milwaukee did have a few, what they called them, below 21 clubs. So they were places that we could go and dance to the music we wanted to dance to. And that's where we started to interact with the art kids from other schools. So suddenly our little circle got a little bit bigger because of these, essentially dance clubs.
Yeah, the realization that there's other people out there is amazing when you're like, oh, it's not just us.
Yeah. They're out there because you see them in the magazines. So, in big cities, there are going to be other people like me, but you never think in a small town there's anyone else, who get it. There's no one else who understands this music.
Did you go to art school or were you studying art in college? What's the overlap there with your aspiration and your reality?
Well, I thought I was going to be an artist. I thought I was going to be Julian Schnabel or David Solly, or I would say Warhol, because obviously, but I thought I was going to be a painter. I thought I was going to be a painter. And I was good in my small town. Certainly. I tried to put on art shows and make the paper about my big painting and all that kind of stuff. But when you finally put a portfolio together and then suddenly you arrive in a big city, I realized very quickly I was not the best in class, and I was not to the level of these other students who came from everywhere, came internationally to this school. It was a very good school. And I thought, well, I'm relatively realistic and thought I'm not going to survive, frankly. I'm just not this. I felt the school wasn't really teaching me how to, I don't know if I thought this at the time. I think about it now. I don't know if the school was teaching me how to monetize what I was doing and how to protect what I was doing, but they were trying to teach me how to be an artist, because you had to take painting and drawing and, sculpture and performance. And you had to check all the categories of art, where I was more interested in, well, how do you do a gallery show? How do you do the commission split? How do you market? So suddenly my mind started to switch a bit more to like a curator or an art gallery owner in a sense. And that's when I switched paths and I started really understanding the power of promotion and marketing and branding. And then I guess that all connects really when you think like it's almost like loving music and thinking I'm going to be the lead singer. And then you get up on stage and you're like, I can't sing a note. That's what I felt like. Like I just have no talent for this.
But come on, you got into the school. They let you in.
Yeah, they did. I got in, but I would paint 8 hours a day. And as soon as I thought I'm not good at this, I stopped.
I understand that. I've said on here before and in other contexts, I always struggled just to be mediocre with music, but I always enjoyed the hustle and the putting on shows and doing all that work. So I definitely understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happened to me, is that I enjoyed the hustle more than I enjoyed the creation of it. So that's when I started going more into the hustle route. And my mom was a big reader, and obviously reading was a big part of my life. And that's when, I started kind of paying attention a little bit more towards publishing and really getting into book marketing and book publishing and being more and more aware of not only classic authors like Henry Miller and so forth, but then the contemporary writers that were big. And that's Jay McInerney, Bret Easton Ellis, Donna Tartt, and that scene, which was very New York City based. And there was literally a day I woke up and I thought, why am I in Chicago? I need to move to New York. So I packed a bag. I put, I probably had about maybe $1,200 cash, not much more than that, and bought a one-way train ticket to go to New York. I didn't tell anyone, really. My mom didn't know it because I didn't want to worry her. I thought, I'm going to get to New York. I'm going to make it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to hustle it. And it took me a week to find an apartment, to get a job. And then I called her from a payphone and said, yeah, I have a new address. Well, let me get a pen and paper. Gave her the address. I said, that's New York. She's like, what? You moved to New York? And I said, oh, yeah, I moved to New York. And
yeah. All right. So let's break this down for a second. You get off the train at Penn Station, I'm assuming, because it was probably an Amtrak that you took from Chicago. You step out onto 34th Street. where do you go? Like, what the fuck? What's like, where do you sleep? What did you eat? What were those first couple of days? Do you remember it all?
I
Had
do.
you been to New York before?
Once.
Okay.
A friend of mine, we went and had a crazy time, ran out of money, stayed up all night because we had nowhere to go. Sort of how it was a crazy adventure. At one point, when a friend and I went to New York, we thought we could take the subway to Atlantic City. I mean, that's how like little knowledge we had. We had no idea where we were. We were in New York. That's all we knew. I got the Village Voice. I went to Central Park, walked to Central Park with my 2 bags. I mean, I had nothing. I left everything and looked at the paper and I found the cheapest hotel, and it was called the Terminal Inn.
Near Port Authority?
The Terminal Inn was on 11th Avenue and 23rd Street. And I knew 23rd Street was where the Chelsea Hotel was. So I thought, how bad could that be? It was frightening. To the
pay by
point
the hour?
where, I mean, there was a club underneath the hotel. There was a club called the Vault. And I guess the Vault's claim to fame is that that was the background to Madonna's sex book. So it was a sex club. And I thought, well, okay, I'm in New York. And I don't remember how much the hotel cost. The hotel was dirt cheap. It was just a room. I slept with the lights on because I was so afraid, mainly of cockroaches. And I put the chair in front of the door because the whole thing was frightening. I mean, talk about motivation. Suddenly I need to get out of this situation. And I found a roommate wanted sort of thing. And I took it. And so I lived with this aspiring drag queen who I believe went by the name of Miss Kitty. So never share a studio apartment with an aspiring drag queen. There's just not enough room.
I was going to say, not enough mirror space.
Now it was tiny, and it was like Upper East Side, but I was settled. I had an address. So it took a week.
I was half expecting you to say you settled in the East Village or something.
You
went right uptown. Right uptown.
I went right to the first place. I mean, I didn't know uptown from downtown. I can tell you the first bar I remember going to in New York when I moved there was called Dick's. Well, this is a great sign. I'm living above a sex club and I'm at a bar called Dick's. Like this is really what I expected New York to be.
Where was it? Do you remember where the bar was?
It was probably Lower East Side. I think it might even still be there.
Was it Dick Manitoba's?
No, it was a let's say a hardcore gay bar, but it was a gay bar that had a lot of pornography playing. Yes, some bars have football, other bars show X-rated movies. So
yeah, whatever. It's all
whatever. I was in. You
had the New York experience.
That is why. That's why I left New York. One of the reasons was, I moved to New York thinking it was either 1977 or 1983, and I was going to jump right into it. But I got there at the tail end of the cleanup. So we still had the 42nd Street bars and clubs, and we still had a few. I mean, you wouldn't go to the meatpacking district. One apartment I had in New York, some of the restaurants wouldn't deliver to us after a certain point because they were too frightened.
When I first moved down there, I spent a couple of months, before I had my own place, I spent a couple of months couch surfing with a friend at the corner of Clinton and Delancey on the Lower East Side. And I tell people when I first got down there, like there were no French restaurants. there was no molecular gastronomy. There was no sushi. Maybe there was a cardboard cup of coffee place. And now, it's obviously it's a playground. And then I went from there to East 11th Street in East Village and say probably similar timing as you, like Giuliani era, still doing the cleanup, I guess you could say. Alphabet City, still sketchy. Still could step over the occasional dead junkie, but it was the tail end. It was the tail end for sure. Yeah.
I'm going to say it's a shame, but it's a shame.
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody has their New York, right? And everybody has their New York was better when, or I just missed it. I think that's the problem is everybody moves to New York for the New York of the generation before them, because that's the one they grew up mythologizing. So I don't know. I have really mixed feelings about it, but it's okay. Like New York's still there, and you could still find a little grime.
You can, but when the Continental and CB's and once the Mars Bar and once those places started to go, it's like You know, I mean, when CBGB's became a clothing store, I thought, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I can stay here, you know.
The Bowery's bizarre. The Bowery's bizarre
Bowery's
now.
bizarre now. Now, my last apartment in New York was on Clinton and Houston.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I mean, I was thrilled to finally live properly in that Lower East Side and had those years there where I could really call that neighborhood my home, because that's, you know, I loved it so much, and I would go there so often. But before I moved there, I was in Hell's Kitchen. I was in Spanish Harlem. You know, I jumped around a little bit as you could back then too, and finally moved downtown just because I thought, if I don't move downtown, I'll never move downtown.
And so what was the first gig? Was the first gig noteworthy? Was it the start of a path, or was it just a job to get a job? Just a job.
So much just a job that it was as 9 to 5 as they got. And at 5:01, I don't remember exactly how I met her, but I met who became one of my best friends in New York and a roommate for many years. We would meet at Coyote Ugly, which was off of St. Mark's, not the one on the west side, but the one on the east side.
First Ave, right?
First Avenue, yeah. Yeah, because we would take the First Avenue bus back uptown, and that was our phone number because it was cheap. It was $1 Pabst, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And you could get $1 slice of pizza and $1 can of beer. I mean, where else can you have dinner for $2?
I went in there one night after work with a backpack on, and one of the girls working at the bar said to me, "Nice backpack. Did your mommy pack your lunch too?"
I loved it.
It was great.
Right.
I remember it.
That's what you want, but that's what you want, you know? You don't want to be open arms, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was like that kind of stuff is like, that's what you're paying for when you pay the New York rent, is like to miss the subway when you're in a rush, to have a taxi splash rainwater on you, to be insulted by some woman that's like probably only a year or two older than you working in a dive bar. Like, perfect. It was perfect.
Now, I mean, I'm in the dive bar. I mean, we'd go to Holiday Cocktail Lounge a lot, which was also nearby. They had a heavy pour, you know. I mean, those drinks were strong. And the booths, I remember the booths in the back of Holiday were covered in duct tape to the point where you would stick to it. If you got up and you could stick to the seat, there was so much tape on those. You know, you'd see the nodding offs on some of the patrons and yeah, I miss the Holiday and that sort of that dive bar mentality.
Yeah.
Not many survive.
Good old man bar. That's how I think of them. Yeah. Open at like 8 a.m. Yeah. All right. So tell me about the career path. Publishing, it's such a big part of your career and the beginning of your career for sure. Tell me about that.
So the kind of the job I had, it was a nothing job. But one day, a woman that I worked with got a package from Random House. And I said, "Who do you know at Random House?" She's like, "Oh, my husband's best friend, Michael, works at Random House." And I said, "Can you introduce me to Michael?" And she said, "Well, he's going to be at our wedding." Fantastic. So a couple of weeks later, I went to this woman's wedding. And so I made a beeline to Michael, introduced myself and said, "You know, will you hire me? I will do anything. I'll work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Will you give me a chance?" And he looked at me and he said, "I'm hiring an assistant." So I don't know if the stars aligned. And he hired me as his assistant. And I worked with him until the day I left New York. So over probably 15 years, I worked with him in various capacities. And he's still one of my best friends. We talk and text and email all the time. But yeah, I just got really, really lucky. It was a chance.
And so if you start as an assistant, where do you end? You
start as an assistant. And then in my case, I worked as hard as I could. I did 24 hours, 7 days a week, because I wanted to prove that I could do it. I wasn't going to be an assistant all my life. I wanted to be the head of it. And that is where I ended. So when I left New York, I was the publisher. So I made it to the point where I wanted to be, where I had a brilliant job. I was very supported. I had a great staff. I was publishing amazing, but I mean, it was every single thing I wanted. You know, I had the big office, big salary. I mean, I had everything. And that's when it just kind of clicked in my head thinking, okay, this all happened. This escalated quickly. Now what do I do? I don't want to go any further than this, because up there looks like a lot of meetings and Excel sheets and budgets. And that's not really what I want to do. I didn't want to be CEO. I wanted to create. And I think sometimes when you're at a corporation, and it was a big corporation, when you're at a corporation, the higher you go, the less you touch what you're making.
All right. So what was the imprint you were publisher for?
I was a publisher at HarperCollins, and I ran 5 divisions. So I ran Harper Perennial, Harper Paperbacks, It Books, which was the entertainment line, Harper Design, which was the high-end photography books, and then some of the calendar program, The Simpsons, Futurama. So some of these sort of branded entertainment, the movie tie-ins. Yeah, I was overseeing over 370 books a year. I said more than one a day. It was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
Do me a favor for my benefit as well as the benefit of our listeners. What's the publisher do?
A publisher oversees the overall imprint's output, and that is from everything from what title are we publishing to how much are we going to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down to the jacket design, the marketing, the editors reported to me, the publicity campaign, the sales channel. So that is what a publisher does, is we watch over the entire operation of that imprint. So all of the books came through me at some point.
Does the publisher put an aesthetic stamp on their imprint?
I think good ones can. I think that clever ones can sort of get away with it. It was very clear what were my books, what were the books that, okay, this is our list that we're making, and the other ones are the other books. So we had like a little tribe of writers. We had a little bit of a zeitgeisty thing. We had a brand. We had parties. We had logos. We had funny ad campaigns. We had real cleverness sometimes to what we were doing that, I wanted to reflect and be inspired by Grove and by vintage and vintage originals. So we were taking what inspired all of us who were working and let's recreate it. Let's publish new writers, alternative writers, exciting writers. Let's make our stamp. If they're letting us do this, let's do it. Let's go out and publish short stories or poetry or debut novels. A lot of publishers kind of steer away from that because it's not profitable. It's not always sustainable. So as long as we could make it sustainable, we were pushing it a little bit, and we had a great time doing it. And we had a real ethos in the sense that we would do events at KGB. I mean, we were starting to do events in bars and because we didn't want to be restricted to, a chain store mentality, because that's not ultimately, we kept thinking, who's reading it? Who's going to buy it? Who's our consumer? And then, okay, where are they? Where are these people going? And let's go there.
Just level set for me a little bit before we move away from this. And will you place this in time for me and tell me what was going on in the greater publishing world and industry? And what era and what changes were you navigating? Or were you sort of immune from the outside forces?
It's a really good question. I mean, I don't think we weren't immune to the outside because we had to ultimately be a profitable imprint. So what we did, we had to sustain in a sense of the big sometimes paid for the small. And maybe they didn't know it. But we had tremendously big, massive, award-winning, amazing writers on our list. And because I looked after the paperback imprint, I was very gifted with A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Brave New World, To Kill a Mockingbird, Their Eyes Were Watching God. So I had this sort of stable of big, heavy hitters that I knew every year I was going to sell without lifting a finger. But what if we do a new edition? What if we do a smaller edition? What if we do a different cover on that one? So we also kind of played around a bit with some of the backlists. Well, why don't we reissue? Why don't we put new graphic covers on it or new photograph? You know what I mean? So we kept looking at ways that we could rebrand and revitalize classic books like The Bell Jar. And we had exciting classics as well as these exciting new writers. I mean, we once did a series of short stories by, I think I was a Herman Melville, Dostoevsky, and a few Oscar Wilde, where in the back of each classic, I put a short story from someone you've never read before, a debut short writer, to sort of match that reader. Was like, if you love Herman Melville, you might love this new writer.
You were the algorithm.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was, and it was cost effective as well, in a sense of like really trying to lead the reader to experiment with their reading, to try something new, and to give a new writer a chance, really. And because we didn't have a big splashy marketing campaign. We weren't even the biggest, splashiest marketing campaigns in book publishing, from the Anne Rice down to the Barbara Kingsolver or Michael Chabon. It wasn't movie budget level. It's not new album release level. I mean, we were all still working, on a very, very small budget, and that budget gets eaten away with because you got to pay for floor displays, and you got to pay for this, and you got to pay for the placement, and you got to pay for a galley, and then you got to mail the galley, and then you got to buy the envelopes. And then, like all that stuff would just eat away at that little budget. And so the money left over, we kept putting into, I'm going to make badges, I'm going to make tote bags. I'm going to figure out what they're doing in the music industry and start doing that for books. People either thought I was crazy or that was kind of a cool thing.
You were the punk rock publisher.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it worked.
One of the reissues or new editions that I thought was so clever and got me to purchase it at least once for myself and at least once for other people was the edition of, had to be maybe mid-late 90s, of Animal Farm with illustrations by Ralph Steadman. So beautiful, so perfect. Like the curation of that was so well done, but the illustrations were just spot on. Incredible.
That's exactly what we were trying to do. We were trying to merge it a bit and trying to walk between the both worlds. And jackets and covers have always been very important to me. And also it's allowing the book jacket designers freedom. I mean, there were cases, and it was my favorite meeting of the week was the cover meeting, which was like a 2 or 3 hour, but it was fantastic. And you could just talk design. And there were some where I said, I'm sorry, but I need the author name bigger. I need a quote. I need a banner. I need, I had to put all these things, that just, I could see the art director like just getting smaller and smaller and smaller because but then there would be books. I said, whatever you want to do, this is yours. I'm not going to, you don't want to put title. You don't want to put type on it. You don't want to, whatever you want to do. And so as long as we kind of allowed that freedom of creativity, you're going to get the best out of people.
Are the book designers at the level you were at, are the book designers staff?
Yeah. They were staff. We did freelance occasionally. So, you'd go through the list. You would try to match up who's going to be, and the designers would say, oh, I want that one. I want that one. And then there were always going to be other ones where, oh, I know who would be perfect for this. Or I'm going to freelance this out because this is a perfect match for so-and-so. So it's a little bit of both. Yeah.
So, I mean, being sort of, I guess I can say it if you can't, like sort of at a top echelon, at a major house, that's heady stuff. Like New York publishing, cranking out 370 books a year. Like
I made it.
That's the shit.
No, right? Middle Times Square, throwing up my hat. Yep.
All right. So Then what?
I got to that point and I just thought, I don't know what I want to do next. I couldn't really figure that out in my head. And then I thought, well, if I don't move now, I'll never do it. And I will sit there my dying day and I will think, I never moved to London. I mean, when you grow up, you've got 1 or 2 opportunities to jump. You jump once when you're young, kind of foolish, kind of stupid. You buy a one-way ticket and you land up in a sleazy hotel. And you can do that when you're young because you can live with the eviction notice when you're a kid and you can kind of scramble and figure out how to keep the lights on. And I remember one time, I have no money. There was an outlet in the hallway of the building I was in. So I had an extension cord going from the hallway, but I couldn't pay the lights. So I couldn't, I needed the alarm clock at the very least to make sure I got to work. If only then the radio to keep me company. I mean, it got to that level at points in my life, which is great that I had that. Not great at the time, but great retrospectively. So that's the first time you can jump. And then I think the second time you can jump is when you're a little bit more secure, a little bit more confident. You've got a couple of dollars in the bank. You've got a good resume. And I just decided, you know what? I'm going to try it again. Can I do that again? Can I pack it up and buy a one-way ticket? And this time, instead of a train, I bought a one-way ticket to London.
Did you go by boat or plane?
You know, I went by plane. I would love to have done the boat. I've never done it. I know people who have had. It sounds amazing. But yeah, I took a one-way ticket on that airplane and landed at Heathrow. And I thought, okay, here we go. Let's do it.
So here's the conundrum. We've got about 10 minutes left, but I feel like that's less than a minute a year. So there's two things that I need to know about. One is being a bookstore proprietor, because that's something we share in common. And I had that in my past. And your current gig, because from afar, what it looks like is it's every possible strand came together to what you're doing now.
In my job in New York, I would come to London quite frequently. And during one visit, I found a book I wanted to publish. I read the first page and I thought, I'm going to buy this. This is the greatest thing I've ever read in my life. Made an offer and I said, but I will only buy it if I can have dinner with him tonight. And so the dinner was set and I met this man named Sebastian Horsley, who was a one-off and absolutely, it's even hard to describe. He was a living, walking piece of art. He's a dandy and that was his profession. So he was a tall man and he always wore a big top hat, platinum shoes. I mean, he was just visually like you can't even comprehend what this guy looked like. And then suddenly he was a writer. He was an artist. He was articulate. He had everything. And I fell in awe of him. And we just started to hang out and we became really good, spend Christmas together. Like we became very close friends to the point where if I was in New York, he'd call me on Thursday and say, can you come here for dinner Saturday? Brian Ferry's coming, blah, 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 blah. I would get on a plane in New York on Friday night, fly to London, land on Saturday, have dinner with this crazy crew of people, and then fly back on Sunday and be back in the office on Monday. And people were like, what are you, are you mad?
I used to do that for concerts. I'd go to London, leave on a Thursday or a Friday, see a show Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday, and Monday morning be back.
That's exactly what it was. I mean, I was so frequent, like I knew the crew on the air because I would always take the same flights. And then he up and ODs. So he died of a heroin overdose. I did tell him I was finally going to move to London. So he did know that, but then he OD'd. And I moved anyway. And he introduced me to the circle in London that eventually would lead to where I am now, in a sense of when I was in New York, I was publishing a book, and then I met this guy, and then the photography thing came because a friend of mine asked, can you just help me sort out this publishing program at this photography company that I'm running? And I said, no, these are horrible. I can sort this out. So one day a week suddenly turned into a full-time job. And that's, as the photography company got bigger and bigger and bigger, that everything that I was doing just got bigger and bigger and bigger because I was kind of helping it grow, which now I do curation and I do the writing. I'm involved in so many different aspects of the business. But yeah, it goes back to the original question of that the people you connect with in your career, no matter what part or what stage, if it's meant to be, you will cross their paths again. And this crossed my path again. And he said, oh, help me out. I said, I'll help you out. So it kind of all comes back full circle. I mean, I'm really lucky. I mean, when you work in the arts, I feel lucky every day, no matter how much work or stress or the to-do list or the dramas and all of that nonsense that we deal with. I mean, I look at photos all day. I look at photos that no one's ever seen. Or maybe they saw it once and they're buried in a box of negatives. And then I pull out Elton John on stage from 1974, David Bowie on stage. You're pulling out these sort of moments in time. I mean, we've got millions of images that we oversee. And my job is to kind of swim through it and pull up Susie Quattro. And then it's introducing the staff as well. You know, as you get older, you start introducing people to these people, introducing kids to Roxy music. Like, how do you not know everything about Roxy music? So that's kind of the joy of it. And it really is a joy.
I've said it before, but like there's nonsense everywhere you work, right? I think everybody goes to work and deals with some level of nonsense. And I say to people, like, at least we're not selling insurance. Because there's just as much bullshit in that office. So like, you know.
So what would you rather be doing?
Yeah, making the world safe for rock and roll.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you just rather work in rock and roll and celebrity and movies? I mean, when things go wrong here or, something happens, I said, whatever, like, we'll fix it. We're not brain surgeons. We're not scrambling for a hospital room. I mean, when you put things in perspective, we shipped something wrong to somebody, whatever, life goes on. You just fix it. Do your best to fix it. Do your best not to do it again.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I hope this was interesting.
Oh, forget it. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
I don't know about phenomenal, but
you'll see. You'll see. By the way, our editor if he can make a babbling fool like me look good, it's you're giving him gold.
On the editing. It's on the editing. There was somebody tonight recently was talking about curation and why. I said, you can't show somebody 3,000 photos of Elton John and think they're going to pick something from 3,000. You have to show them 30 amazing images. Then they'll pick something. Then they'll buy.
Yeah, and they can almost not make a bad choice at that point, right? Like,
exactly. I think curation, we just don't talk enough about and the importance of somebody helping somebody make a choice. And that's what curation is. And that's also a very different thing in London compared to America, is that I go to a grocery store, there's like 5 different cereals. If I go to America, there's like 500 cereals. I think that you have to deal with the paradox of choice.
I mean, there's probably 30 different kinds of Cheerios.
Not here.
Crazy.
Not here.
Good for you, man. Carrie, have a great weekend.
You as well.
Thank you so much, Carrie Kania and everyone at Iconic Images. Thank you, Aunt Taylor and the team at Light. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On. Get and share all of our past episodes, write a review, and even send us a message all through our website, spotlightonpodcast.com. If you like what we're up to here, please leave us a review on Spotify, Apple, or wherever in God's name you get your podcasts from. Join us again next week. In the meantime, be safe and stay in touch.